looking at prayer. You know, we've been looking at prayer, and I think I've been mentioning it quite often, that prayer is just talking to God. And I talk to my daddy. I'm taking him off. I'm sorry. It just feels weird. I talk to my daddy and carry on conversation with him in a different way that I do God. Because God is God and my daddy is a man. So I approach him with a different kind of an attitude. Am I getting too loud? Sorry. It just bothers me to listen to people talk to God nowadays and sing about God and sing to God. And I'm like, come on, we got to make a distinction. He's the God of the universe. He's the creator, the maker of man, the maker of everything. So, I think, conversating with God ought to be I think we're going to find out here in a minute, with knowledge of God, about God, with reverence. There's nothing wrong. Well, you're a legalist. No, I'm not. I'm just saying, come on, man. Can't we approach God with reverential awe and not feel guilty about it? Doesn't he deserve that, at least? So prayer is talking to God, but knowing who he is. He's not your daddy that raised you up and paddled you and fed you and made you work and taught you this, that, or the other. Your daddy was a sinner. Your mother was too. I hate to say this. I don't know all your daddies and your mamas, but they're sinners. God is not. I don't talk to him like he's a sinner, but I do talk to him like he knows sinners. He made man. He knows what man's problem is. He knows exactly what man in general's problem is, and he knows exactly what yours is. He knows. We could look at the model prayer, but I've been picking people to that, through the scriptures to look at. And the guy that I came to today is Solomon. Y'all remember him? Well, when people think of Solomon, and I know Baptist people, when they think of Solomon, the first thing that comes to their mind is all the wives and the concubines that he had. Yeah, Solomon, he had all the wives and all the concubines. Yeah, that's this Solomon. But I think we have recorded in the Word of God him having a conversation and talking to God. I haven't made too much about it, but in dispensations of time, people are different. Things are different. Governments are different. Technology's different. The way we eat, drink, and sleep is different. So keep that in mind. But God doesn't change. And I think we'll find things in the prayers of some of these holy men. He was a holy man. Y'all ever heard of the book of Proverbs? You know who wrote that? Solomon wrote that. Ecclesiastes? You know who wrote that? Solomon wrote that. But I think very early in his life, we find and discover something about him, and we're going to read about that just a little bit in 1 Kings chapter 3. First Kings chapter 3, starting in verse 3. And I tell you, it wasn't until I started listening to and been influenced personally by expositors that I really slowed down and really started paying attention to line by line. In other words, comma to comma, putting things in context, not building a sermon that's not there. The sermon is in the text, Steve. I was a little bit slow, and I probably heard that from several aged preachers in my life. The sermon is there. It's right there. You know, just look at the text, and you'll find the sermon. What's the sermon? Well, we hope it's the truth that we need to help us understand a little bit about God and a little bit about I know what impresses my daddy, by the way, Steve Sr. But what impresses him don't impress God. I was raised by this man. I know my dad. I know what he likes. I know what he thinks is funny, and I know what ticks him off. And I know what gets his goat. I try not to do two of those things. You know, I try not to get his goat or tick him off. He is my daddy. But here we got God. We consider him our Father, right? Because we are born again, children of God. So we go to our Father in heaven but we want to know how to do that and what's helpful and what's good, right? We learn that from Old Testament prophets and holy men and from the New Testament and things like that from preaching. So let's just look at what Solomon, this little discourse and this discussion with Solomon and God right here. Y'all ready for this? And Solomon loved the Lord. Wow, ain't that sweet? Sounds sweet. But how did he love the Lord, y'all? See, there's the lesson that we need to learn right there. How did he love the Lord? Walking in the statutes of David, his father. How did he love the Lord? He walked in the There's that love that, oh, I love you, oh, I love you. That's all well and good. How? How do you love me? How so? And by the way, I've learned a long time ago, quit asking that question. It makes people mad. This much is no. How did Solomon love the Lord? He walked. This is how he loved the Lord. He walked in the statutes of David, his father. That would be King David, the sweet psalmist of Israel. Only he sacrificed and burnt incense in high places. That is where the tabernacle was, by the way. It's not talking about Baal worship. You know, that's what Baal worshipers in their high places. It's where the tabernacle was. You read about that in 1 Chronicles 16:39. And the king went to Gibeon to sacrifice there, for that was the great high place. What did I just not answer my own question? What high places? What's the Bible say? There's the answer right there. In Gibeah, 1,000 burnt offerings did Solomon offer upon the altar. That's a lot of burnt offerings. I think what this is a celebration and a feast. So I'm sure that there are whole burnt offerings involved, but then there are offerings. I think the people had a great feast. This is my personal opinion. Solomon offered on the altar. In Gibeon, the Lord appeared unto Solomon in a dream by night. And God said, well, that's always, Isn't that always what God said? What did God say? Don't we want to know what God said? What does God say about all this? What does God feel about all this? You hear all kinds of crazy things today. All we know that what God, how we feel, is we read all through the Bible what God said. You all remember the story of Job? We ain't going to go through the book of Job for time's sake, but you see what I'm talking about. Everybody spoke, and then God spoke. After everybody else got through talking, God says, all right, it's my turn. And don't we just love to hear what God says? And God said, ask what I shall give thee. How did he do this? In a dream. Solomon was just laying down and he had a dream. Well, does God approach us in our dreams today? No. He approaches us through the written word of God. Now, how did he approach Solomon? In a dream. Do you know Solomon wrote 2 of the greatest books in the Bible? He was a holy man. Are you a holy person? No. But you know what we have? What God said to Solomon in a dream. How did God approach Solomon in this dream? That I don't know. And he asked, what I shall give thee. And Solomon said, Thou hast showed unto thy servant David, my father, great mercy, according as he walked before thee in truth and in righteousness and in uprightness of heart with thee. What do you think that means there? And God says, what do you want? And what did Solomon say? You know that mercy that you gave David, my father? That's the first thing he said. I don't know about you all these days. I'm not so enthused by, and I think it's the best way, the American way, it's the best way. But I'm not so enthused about what the world's doing and where it's going and what it's doing and they're so godless. The leaders are godless. When was the last time you heard the leaders talk about God, unless it was some weird, mentioning him to the side? What does Vladimir Putin say about God? President of Russia. What is Zelensky, the guy they're fighting over in Ukraine? What theology is he proposing? The Chinese guy, what's his name? I don't even remember. Been hearing it all day. What theology is from heaven and from God is he proposing? We live in such a godless society. Those are the guys that send people off to get slaughtered, killed, and kill. Not only get killed, but go off and kill. I personally need the mercy of God. You know what that is? That's God withholding terrible things that I deserve as a human being. That's what mercy is. Withholding terrible things from me, not because of me, but because of who he is, because of who Jesus is. And based on what he said because of the mercy you showed my father. That's the first thing he mentioned. I didn't want to get too much into it because I want to get to prayer meeting tonight. And thou hast kept for him this great kindness, that thou hast given him a son to sit on his throne. Now he's talking to God. Very young man. He's just a boy.